"Dad, do you like the $4,200 Camille gives you?" The question wasn't asked in private. It wasn't a gentle query over coffee. It was delivered in front of my son's entire family, his wife, Camille, our 3 grandchildren, and about 20 of their extended friends and business associates. A veritable power luncheon held on the sprawling, sun-drenched veranda of his $1 million estate on Father's Day. I remember the exact, chilling weight of the silence that followed. It wasn't the silence of confusion. It was the silence of everyone waiting for the patriarch to give the expected, humble, grateful response. My son, Ethan, a man whose success I had literally paid for with my entire future, looked at me with an expression that was part proud, part superior, and utterly dismissive. He wasn't asking about my happiness or my security. He was asking for public validation of his and Camille's staged generosity. The $4,200 he referenced wasn't a gift. It was the exact meager amount I received monthly from the tiny, non-voting stock dividends he had allowed me to keep when he finalized the takeover of the company I helped found. It was my financial lifeline, the threadbare safety net that kept my modest retirement afloat. I stood there, holding a nearly empty glass of iced tea, feeling the heat of the summer sun and the cold stare of the man I had sacrificed everything for, and realized he saw my financial survival not as his responsibility, but as a charitable allowance, a tax-deductible expense to be paraded for social credit. In that single, searing moment, a switch flipped deep within me. The years of silent resentment, the sting of being constantly sidelined, and the profound lack of acknowledgement for my sacrifice crystallized into a single, burning purpose. I had 2 clear paths. I could accept the humiliation, offer a saccharine thank you for the crumbs, and spend the rest of my days as their tolerated guest. Or I could expose the entire, glittering facade of his self-made success and reclaim not just my financial security, but my dignity. Tell me honestly, if your millionaire son, the man you gave up your retirement home for, used your dependents as a social prop on Father's Day, would you have swallowed your pride, or would you have delivered a public lesson in humility he and his calculating wife would never, ever forget? Because what happened next was a carefully planned, surgical lesson in just how quickly fortunes and family pride can crumble when built on a lie. To truly comprehend the depth of the betrayal and the complex, corrosive bitterness triggered by that Father's Day question, you must first understand the true, messy foundation of Ethan's empire. Sterling Logistics. I, Robert Sterling, was a man of routines and hard numbers. I worked as a middle manager in a regional trucking company for 20 years. I wasn't rich, but I was stable, methodical, and I believed fiercely in deferred gratification. I saved every single dime, imagining a simple, secure retirement with my late wife, Martha. Ethan was my only child. From the moment he showed a spark of entrepreneurial interest in logistics and supply chain management in college, the very field I knew intimately, I channeled all my hope, all my savings, and all my knowledge into him. I saw his potential, and I saw a chance for him to achieve the stability I had worked 2 decades for. When he graduated 10 years ago with a brilliant, highly ambitious, but deeply leveraged business plan to launch a specialty cross-country freight service, the institutional banks laughed him out of the room. They saw the risk. I saw my son's drive. So, I made the colossal, irreversible decision. I sold the one thing that was purely mine, the beautiful, modest house Martha and I had poured our hearts into and planned to retire in, complete with the garden she loved. I liquidated my entire, carefully accumulated pension, took out a second, high-interest mortgage on a small rental property I owned, and handed Ethan a certified bank check for a staggering $480,000. 0 in seed money. This wasn't a casual gift. It was a sacrifice that left me financially exposed, relying on my continued employment and that small rental property for my future. Ethan was ecstatic. He called it an investment and promised me, with tears in his eyes, that the day he succeeded, I would be the first person he took care of. He drafted a hasty, handwritten agreement on a notepad, stating I was an equal founding partner, entitled to a proportional stake corresponding to the $480,000 capital, and that my operational knowledge would be considered sweat equity. We never had it notarized. We were father and son, and I trusted him implicitly. I became his indispensable, unofficial advisor, working 60-hour days alongside him in the tiny, windowless office we rented, managing drivers, running inventory, handling payroll, and debugging the endless operational nightmares while somehow managing to keep my old day job for insurance. I was the silent partner, the quality control, the one who answered the 3 a.m. calls when a truck broke down in Oklahoma. For the first 5 lean, brutal years, the arrangement worked. Sterling Logistics boomed, growing rapidly based on the foundational operational discipline I instilled. Ethan was undeniably a brilliant strategist and salesman, but I was the tireless, thankless engine that kept the gears turning. I was his indispensable, uncompensated chief operating officer. 5 years ago, the company hit the national stage and needed a final, massive capital injection, the kind that attracts serious hedge fund attention, to automate its warehousing and expand its fleet to the national level. This is when the sharks arrived, primarily in the form of Ethan's new wife, Camille. Camille came from old, established wealth, the kind that views labor as something outsourced, not something performed. She worked in corporate acquisition and saw Sterling Logistics not as a family business, but as a financial asset ripe for optimization and image rebranding. During the restructuring, Camille insisted they clean up the ownership structure to make it appealing to institutional investors. My original $480,000 being the sole initial capital suddenly became a liability in their pristine new financial model. Because I refused to hire my own lawyer, still trusting my son and wanting to simplify things for him, I was persuaded to sign documents that formalized my retirement from the company and gave me a laughably small block of non-voting stock. The original handwritten agreement was declared outdated and irrelevant. The stock was enough to yield a dividend, but it gave me zero control, zero voting rights, and essentially erased my sweat equity and my original capital contribution as anything significant other than a seed fund loan repaid with interest. Ethan reluctantly gave me the title of head of special projects, a meaningless position that quickly devolved into being his personal driver, proofreading his corporate speeches, and occasionally overseeing yard maintenance, a move calculated by Camille to subtly push me out of the corporate narrative entirely. The $4,200 he was referring to was the paltry monthly dividend from that tiny, impotent stock block, my reward for sacrificing my home, my pension, and 5 years of my life. The arrangement left me at age 60 with nothing but a small, paid-off duplex, a fraction of the value of my original house, and the crushing realization that my son had legally minimized my existence and weaponized my trust. Camille was relentless. She managed the social image of the Sterling name, which required transforming Ethan into an untouchable, self-made legend while subtly pushing me, the old-school technician, into the shadows. She hated that I was still driving the 10-year-old sedan and wore the same unstylish tweed jackets. Our interactions became strictly regulated. I was the tolerated elder, not the founder. Every public success, every interview, every grand opening was a painful revisionist history session where my role was conveniently omitted or relegated to early logistical help. The truth was, my life had become a stage prop for their success. Father's Day was the annual, orchestrated apex of this ritual humiliation. Every year, it was a showcase of their escalating wealth, the sprawling lawn, the private chef, the constant name-dropping of powerful friends. This year, the question about the money, the public, performative display of my dependence was the final, unforgivable insult. They had trapped me. If I said the money was great, I validated their generosity. If I said it wasn't enough, I looked like an ungrateful, desperate old man. I saw the look of smug satisfaction on Camille's face, her eyes fixed on me, waiting for the performance of required gratitude. She was betting on my silence and my pride. That's when the calculation began. I didn't get angry, I got surgical. I decided to use the very stage they provided to expose the truth. I had already spent the last 6 months preparing. I took a long, deliberate sip of my iced tea, letting the cool liquid settle my nerves. I met Ethan's eye, then Camille's. The other guests, a mix of corporate executives and society wives, people who understood the language of finance and power better than they understood familial love, were buzzing quietly, sensing the atmosphere shift from relaxed celebration to something far more tense. I smiled, a tight, dry smile that didn't reach my eyes, a professional smile. Ethan, Camille, I began, my voice perfectly calm, cutting through the background noise of expensive jazz and soft chatter. It's a wonderful party. The catering is excellent. Thank you for including me. I paused, letting the pleasantries settle. And yes, Ethan, to answer your question directly, I absolutely love the $4,200 you and Camille give me every month. It's a perfect symbol, isn't it? A symbol of my financial reliance on benevolence of the corporate structure. I continued, leaning forward slightly in my chair, addressing the entire table now with the calm cadence of a man reading a quarterly report. But you know, symbols only have meaning if you understand the history behind them. And the history of this particular symbol, this $4,200, is quite instructive in understanding the true foundation of sterling logistics. I then pivoted from emotional testimony to cold, hard fact. I told the story of the $480,000, using the exact number, repeating it slowly, making sure the executives around the table could process the magnitude of the seed capital. I described selling the house, the emotional weight of that loss for Martha, the trading of my secured future for Ethan's uncertain dream. I described the sleepless nights, the 60-hour shifts, and the years of unpaid, foundational operational labor I put in. I didn't accuse, I documented, that $4,200 a month. I explained, looking directly at Mr. Henderson, a senior corporate lawyer I recognized from a competitor firm, is the dividend from the tiny fraction of stock I was issued to repay my original $480,000 capital, which, accounting for inflation and the current valuation of sterling logistics, which Ethan, you yourself valued at approximately $60 million last year, correct? Ethan stammered, his face losing color, trying desperately to shut me up. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Camille's jaw was locked, her eyes daggering me, sending me frantic, silent warnings to stop. I didn't stop. That $4,200, I continued, speaking precisely, represents less than a 2% annual return on my original capital investment over 10 years, not counting the value of my 5 years of uncompensated labor. which, if calculated at a market rate for a COO, would easily exceed $1.5 million. It is, mathematically speaking, a terrible return for a founder. But more importantly, I said, my voice dropping to a fierce, quiet intensity that commanded attention, it's the only remnant of my entire retirement and the house my late wife loved, which I willingly surrendered for the promise that my son would succeed. I love the money, Ethan, because it reminds me of the magnitude of my sacrifice and the calculated minimization of that sacrifice through the issuance of non-voting stock, stripping me of the control that my original investment justified. The entire veranda was silent now. The social performance had become a public, terrifying corporate audit. Ethan was visibly shaking, finally managing to choke out, "Dad, we can discuss this privately. This is not the place." I stood up before he could, my spine ramrod straight, my modest clothes suddenly feeling more powerful than their designer labels. I knew my words alone wouldn't be enough. The truth would be dismissed as the rambling of an ungrateful father. I needed definitive proof, a financial bomb that would instantly shatter their social standing and their self-made myth. I had spent the last 2 months working with an independent financial attorney, M.S. Davies, preparing for this precise moment, anticipating they would use my dependence as a weapon. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out a single, crisp, professionally printed document. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was a purchase and assignment agreement. "Ethan, you made it public," I announced, holding the document high enough for everyone to see the logo and official letterhead. "I'm just completing the transaction." I didn't let the silence hold. "When you and Camille restructured Sterling Logistics 5 years ago, you were sloppy. You dismissed my original capital as family generosity and assigned me non-voting stock. However, your corporate charter and your initial banking documents required the physical assets purchased with the $480,000, namely, the down payments on your first 4 long-haul trucks, to be fully unencumbered. But they weren't. The haste in the merger meant that the original private lien against those assets, tied to my initial wire transfer, was never formally released by a separate, specific legal instrument. It was a paperwork oversight, but a crucial one. I tapped the document. I knew this conversation would happen one day, Ethan. So, 5 years ago, I met with a legal team. We quietly secured a specific, legally sound financial insurance policy tied to that unreleased lien on my original capital. It had nothing to do with your millions of shares or your current company value, but everything to do with the origin of the business's physical assets. I paused again, letting the financial terms sink in. The expressions of the corporate guests had shifted from curiosity to alarm. They understood this kind of operational vulnerability. 6 months ago, anticipating that I would need to secure my real retirement, I executed a reverse leverage clause in that original policy. Yesterday, on the eve of Father's Day, that clause was activated. My voice was a hammer blow, cold and final. The $4,200 dividend, keep it. But effective this morning, I am dissolving my remaining stock block and selling the underlying legal claim. That powerful, unreleased lien against Sterling Logistics foundational assets. I sold it to the only organization willing to pay its true current leveraged value, a value far exceeding the original $480,000. I paused one last time, making sure everyone was hanging on my every word, then delivered the final, crushing sentence, naming the company I had sold my claim to. I sold it to Consolidated Freight Holdings. The sound of a glass shattering somewhere in the background was the only response. Consolidated Freight Holdings was Sterling Logistics' largest, most aggressive, and most dangerous competitor. They didn't just buy my $480,000. claim, they bought a legal, undeniable stake in the company's financial origin, giving them a powerful, if indirect, legal and financial lever over Sterling Logistics that Ethan and Camille never saw coming. It wasn't a controlling stake, but it was an existential threat that compromised every future financing deal, every line of credit, and every merger they planned. My leverage wasn't just the money, it was the ability to weaponize their legal blind spot, the financial paperwork flaw that they had carelessly left exposed. I hadn't destroyed the company, but I had handed its throat to its biggest enemy. Ethan collapsed back into his chair, his face a sickening shade of gray, visibly hyperventilating. Camille screamed not in anger, but in sheer, cold horror, understanding that her entire social and financial life was about to implode. The corporate lawyer across the table was already fumbling with his phone, understanding the immediate need to contact his firm. I turned my back to them, addressing the stunned guests, the corporate elite who now saw Ethan not as a genius, but as an arrogant, careless fool who overlooked a foundational financial vulnerability. I didn't betray my son, I stated, my voice echoing with finality. I simply withdrew my retirement from a high-risk, unethically managed fund. I acted as a prudent investor, reclaiming his principal. I took one last, long look at the sprawling property built on my sacrifice, savoring the silence, and then I walked off the veranda, through the beautiful, overwhelming house that my money had helped build, and got into my car. The aftermath was absolute and total. The news hit the financial circuits within 24 hours. Consolidated Freight didn't waste a minute, using their new legal lever to launch a highly embarrassing, legally sound corporate investigation into Sterling Logistics' financial history, focusing entirely on the legality of the original asset acquisition. Ethan and Camille were instantly embroiled in legal battles, public scandal, and the instant evaporation of their carefully curated image. Their friends and associates, those very people at the lunch, were running for the hills, unwilling to be associated with compromised capital. Ethan called me multiple times, leaving messages that oscillated between tearful begging and furious threats. He never apologized for the public humiliation or the theft of my retirement. He only begged me to rescind the sale. I never answered. I never spoke to him or Camille again. Clara, my sister, who had always witnessed my quiet sacrifice, was the only family member who called me, her voice filled with quiet pride, saying, "You did the right thing, Robert." They needed to learn the difference between success and entitlement. The true victory was both financial and emotional. The sale of my leveraged claim netted me a comfortable, legally untouchable $2.5 million, a figure that far surpassed my original retirement plan and was a proportional reward for my years of uncompensated labor and the risk I took. I used the money to buy a beautiful, small, quiet house on the coast, where I finally retired with peace and security, spending my days reading and walking the beach, something I never had time for when I was helping Ethan. I hear, through the corporate grapevine, that Ethan and Camille had to take out a massive line of credit and sell a significant amount of their private stock, likely even the house, to fight the legal battle against Consolidated and plug the immense hole in their financial structure. They didn't lose the company, but their control was compromised, their wealth severely diminished, and their arrogance shattered. I achieved what I had planned: total financial independence and the permanent shattering of their false prestige. On Father's Day, they tried to use my $4,200 as a measure of their superiority. I responded by showing them that my $480,000 was the foundation they couldn't stand without, and that foundation was now a weapon aimed squarely at their empire. So that's the end of my story. I lost a son who chose money over a father, but I gained a peace, a secure retirement, and the knowledge that I taught two entitled people the true value of respect and accountability. I realized that a father's greatest sacrifice can also become his greatest weapon when love is confused with capital. I still wonder if the method was too harsh, handing my son's Achilles heel to his biggest rival. But the years of silent humiliation and the final public insult left me no alternative. I can finally live the quiet, dignity-filled life Martha and I dreamed of. Like this video if you think my dramatic, high-stakes move was justified to secure my financial future. Subscribe for more stories about financial betrayal, corporate revenge, and finding happiness after cutting off toxic family. And please, share your final thoughts on my decision to weaponize my original investment in the comments section below. I'll see you all in the next story.